The encrypted radio burst lasted exactly 4 seconds before cutting to static. Bravo team to command, compromised position, heavy contact, need immediate extraction coordinates. Then nothing. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the weight of 11 lives hanging in digital limbo somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan. In the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Chapman, Colonel Marcus Rivera stared at the communications array as if willing it back to life. The massive screens that normally displayed real-time satellite feeds, radio chatter, and GPS coordinates of friendly forces now showed only error messages and connection timeouts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. How long since last contact? Rivera asked, though he already knew the answer. 17 minutes, sir, replied Staff Sergeant James Chun, frantically adjusting frequency dials. Lost all comms after that burst transmission. GPS tracking is down, satellite uplink is compromised, and we can't reach them on any channel. The situation was deteriorating by the minute. SEAL Team Bravo had been inserted into a supposedly quiet valley to gather intelligence on a high-value target. What should have been a routine reconnaissance mission had clearly gone sideways. Without communication, the team was operating blind in hostile territory with no way to call for support, request extraction, or even confirm their status. Rivera's mind raced through the available options, each one more limited than the last. The communications blackout wasn't just affecting Bravo team, it was system-wide. Every frequency they tried yielded the same result: static, interference, or complete dead air. The sophisticated enemy jamming equipment in the region had finally achieved what it was designed to do: create a communication dead zone that turned elite warriors into isolated ghosts. Sir, we've tried everything, Chun reported, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Standard military frequencies, emergency channels, even civilian bands. Whatever they're using to jam us, it's comprehensive and professional grade. The colonel nodded grimly. In the modern military, communication was everything. Without it, even the most skilled operators became vulnerable. GPS-guided munitions couldn't find their targets, medevac helicopters couldn't locate wounded soldiers, and commanders couldn't coordinate complex operations. The enemy understood this weakness and had exploited it perfectly. What about the backup communication specialists? Rivera asked. Technical Sergeant Williams is in Germany for training, and Sergeant Martinez is on medical leave after that IED incident last month, Chun replied. We're running on a skeleton crew for specialized communications. Rivera felt the familiar weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. 11 of his best operators were out there, possibly wounded, possibly surrounded, definitely isolated. Every minute of silence decreased their chances of survival. The enemy forces in the region were known for their brutality toward captured American soldiers, and SEAL teams were considered high-value prizes. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the intelligence station, we're detecting increased enemy radio chatter in the area. They know something's happened. The situation was becoming critical. Not only were the SEALs cut off from friendly forces, but enemy combatants were actively searching for them. Without the ability to communicate, coordinate, or call for reinforcements, Bravo team was walking into what could become a massacre. Get me every communications expert we have, Rivera ordered. I don't care if they're off duty, on leave, or in the middle of dinner. We need solutions, not excuses. But even as he gave the order, Rivera knew the truth. Their best communication specialists were either unavailable or had already tried everything within their power. The jamming technology being used was beyond the scope of standard military countermeasures. They needed someone with specialized knowledge, someone who understood both military communications and the kind of advanced electronic warfare being employed against them. Sir, Chun said hesitantly, there's one person who might be able to help, but what? Chun exchanged glances with the other personnel in the operations center. The name he was about to mention carried weight, most of it negative. Technical Sergeant Rachel Morgan, sir. She's still on base. The name hung in the air like a live grenade. Rachel Morgan. Even Rivera, despite his years of command experience, felt a familiar, uncomfortable tension at the mention of that name. Morgan wasn't just any communications specialist. She had been one of the most gifted electronic warfare experts the military had ever produced. Her understanding of digital communications, encryption protocols, and signal intelligence had been legendary among those who knew her work. But that was before the incident 18 months ago. Before the court-martial that had stripped her of her security clearance, her access to classified systems, and her role in active operations. Before she had become the kind of person whose name was spoken in whispers, if it was spoken at all. She's been restricted to base maintenance duties since her demotion, Chun continued carefully. No access to classified communications equipment. No involvement in operational activities. She's basically... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Basically what? Basically fixing broken radios and maintaining equipment that doesn't require security clearance, sir. Rivera closed his eyes for a moment. Rachel Morgan. 28 years old, brilliant beyond measure, and completely untouchable from an operational standpoint. Her fall from grace had been spectacular and public enough that even officers outside the communications field knew the story. She had been caught attempting to hack into classified systems without authorization, supposedly to prove security vulnerabilities. The military justice system had been swift and merciless. Her explanation, that she had been trying to prevent a security breach by demonstrating system weaknesses, had fallen on deaf ears. Intent didn't matter when it came to unauthorized access of classified information. The fact that her hacking had potentially exposed sensitive operational data had made her case even worse. Her career had been destroyed, her reputation ruined, and her access to the tools that had made her valuable had been permanently revoked. Where is she now? Rivera asked. Equipment maintenance bay, sir. Building C7. She's been working on basic radio repairs for the past 6 months. Rivera weighed his options. Reaching out to Morgan would be career suicide if it went wrong. She was persona non grata in military communication circles, someone whose mere involvement in an operation could cast doubt on its legitimacy. Her security clearance had been revoked, her access to classified systems terminated, and her participation in any operational activities strictly forbidden. But 11 SEALs were out there in the dark, and conventional solutions weren't working. Get her, Rivera said finally. Sir, I'm not sure that's... Get her now. 20 minutes later, Rachel Morgan stood in the doorway of the Tactical Operations Center, and Rivera understood immediately why her presence made people uncomfortable. It wasn't just her history or her reputation, it was the way she carried herself. Despite 18 months of professional exile, despite the humiliation of her demotion and the daily reminder of her disgrace, she still possessed an air of quiet competence that was impossible to ignore. She was shorter than Rivera had expected. Maybe 5 feet 6 inches, with dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail and dark eyes that seemed to absorb information faster than most people could process it. Her uniform was immaculate despite spending her days elbow-deep in electronic equipment, and her posture was straight and professional. But there was something else in her bearing, a kind of resigned patience, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment for 18 months. Technical Sergeant Morgan reporting, sir, she said, her voice calm and measured. Sergeant Morgan, Rivera began, then paused. How do you explain to someone who had been systematically excluded from operational activities that you suddenly needed their expertise? How do you ask for help from someone the system had declared untrustworthy? Sir, if I may, Morgan said quietly, I've been monitoring the communication attempts from the maintenance bay. Standard protocols aren't working because the jamming system being used operates on multiple frequency bands simultaneously, with adaptive algorithms that adjust to countermeasures in real time. Rivera stared at her. You've been monitoring classified communications? No, sir. I've been monitoring the attempts to establish communications. The frequencies being used, the power levels, the transmission patterns. All information available from standard radio maintenance equipment. Her explanation was technically correct, but walked a thin line that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. And your assessment? The enemy jamming system is sophisticated enough that it's probably not locally manufactured. Most likely Chinese or Russian electronic warfare equipment, possibly modified for this specific operational environment. It's designed to create a comprehensive communications blackout by jamming multiple frequency bands, while also conducting active interference against satellite communication attempts. The technical accuracy of her assessment was undeniable. In 30 seconds, she had provided more useful intelligence about their communications problem than the entire operations staff had generated in the past hour. But her knowledge also raised uncomfortable questions about how someone with no official access to operational information could understand their situation so clearly. What would you need to break through it? Rivera asked. Morgan was quiet for a moment, and Rivera could see her calculating not just the technical requirements, but the personal risks of her answer. Sir, I would need access to the main communications array, including classified frequency databases and encryption protocols. I would need to use techniques that aren't covered in standard operating procedures. And I would need to work without oversight or interference while I attempt to establish contact. Every word of her response violated multiple regulations. Access to classified systems required security clearance she didn't possess. Working without oversight contradicted basic military protocol. Using unauthorized techniques could be construed as another breach of regulations that would destroy what remained of her career. And if you're caught using unauthorized methods, sir, I'm already caught. My career was effectively ended 18 months ago. The question isn't what happens to me, it's whether those 11 operators make it home alive. The honesty in her response was startling. Morgan wasn't trying to rehabilitate her reputation or prove her innocence. She was simply acknowledging that she had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by helping, regardless of the personal consequences. The risk, Chun began. The risk is acceptable, Rivera interrupted, compared to losing an entire SEAL team. He looked directly at Morgan. What do you need? Complete access to the communications center for 30 minutes. No questions about my methods, no interference with my work, and no official record of my involvement, regardless of the outcome. Rivera understood the implications. If Morgan succeeded in establishing communication, she would receive no official credit or recognition. If she failed, or if her methods were discovered to violate regulations, she would face additional punishment while the command structure maintained plausible deniability about her involvement. Done, Rivera said. Morgan nodded once and walked directly to the primary communications console. Her movements were precise and confident, as if the 18 months of exile had been merely a brief interruption rather than a career-ending punishment. She sat down at the control station and immediately began accessing systems that should have been far beyond her security authorization. Sir, Chun whispered urgently, she's accessing classified frequency databases. I know, Rivera replied, watching Morgan's fingers move across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Without proper clearance, that's a federal offense. I know that too. What Rivera also knew, but didn't say aloud, was that Rachel Morgan's fall from Grace 18 months ago had been more complicated than the official record suggested. The unauthorized access that had ended her career hadn't been random hacking or personal curiosity. She had been investigating potential security vulnerabilities in military communication systems, vulnerabilities that, if exploited by enemy forces, could result in exactly the kind of communications blackout they were experiencing now. Her methods had been unauthorized, her approach had violated protocol, and her actions had technically constituted a breach of security regulations. But her warnings about system weaknesses had proven prophetic. The very vulnerabilities she had tried to expose were now being exploited by enemy, jamming equipment that was systematically isolating American forces in the field. The irony was painful. The woman who had been punished for unauthorized access to communication systems was now their only hope of using those same systems to save lives. Her punishment for trying to prevent this exact situation had left her powerless to help when the situation actually occurred. Morgan worked in silence for several minutes, her hands moving quickly across multiple keyboards and control interfaces. She wasn't just adjusting frequency settings or increasing transmission power. She was fundamentally reconfiguring how the communication system operated. Instead of fighting against the jamming signals, she was finding ways to work around them. "What is she doing?" Lieutenant Kim whispered. "She's creating a mesh network," Morgan said, without looking up from her work. "Instead of trying to overpower the jamming signals, I'm establishing multiple communication pathways that can route around the interference. Think of it like water finding its way through a dam. If one path is blocked, the signal finds another route." The technical complexity of what she was describing was staggering. Military communication systems were designed for reliability and security, not for the kind of adaptive routing she was implementing. Her approach required real-time modification of encryption protocols, dynamic frequency allocation, and coordination between multiple satellite systems that weren't designed to work together in this manner. "Is that even possible?" Chun asked. "It shouldn't be," Morgan replied, still focused on her work. "The systems aren't designed for this kind of integration. But the enemy jamming equipment is designed to counter conventional communication methods. They're not prepared for something that doesn't follow standard protocols." Rivera watched her work and began to understand why Morgan's unauthorized activities 18 months ago had caused such concern among military leadership. Her understanding of communication systems went far beyond standard training. She didn't just know how to use military communication equipment, she understood how it worked at a fundamental level, and she could modify its behavior in ways that its designers had never intended. This level of knowledge and capability made her incredibly valuable in situations like this one, but it also made her dangerous from a security standpoint. Someone who could reconfigure military communication systems to bypass enemy jamming could also potentially reconfigure them to intercept friendly communications or provide unauthorized access to classified information. Her punishment hadn't just been about the specific breach of protocol, it had been about the recognition that her capabilities exceeded the military's ability to control or contain them. She was too skilled, too creative, and too willing to work outside established boundaries to be completely trusted with sensitive systems. But now, with 11 lives hanging in the balance, those same capabilities that had made her dangerous also made her indispensable. "Sir," Morgan said suddenly, "I'm getting something." The main communication screen flickered to life, displaying a weak but stable signal indicator. Static filled the speakers, but underneath the interference, Rivera could hear something that made his heart race. Human voices. "Bravo team, this is Chapman Base, do you copy?" Morgan spoke into her headset microphone. The response was immediate and filled with relief. "Chapman Base, this is Bravo 6. We copy you 5 by 5. We've been trying to reach you for over an hour." Cheers erupted in the Tactical Operations Center, but Morgan remained focused on her equipment. "Bravo 6, what's your status?" We're in a defensive position approximately 2 clicks northwest of our original insertion point. We have enemy forces probing our perimeter, but no casualties at this time. We need extraction coordinates and air support if available. Rivera felt a wave of relief wash over him. The SEALs were alive, they were in contact, and they still had fighting capability. But the situation was still critical. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and in need of immediate assistance. Bravo 6, stand by for extraction coordinates, Morgan said, then looked at Rivera. Sir, I can maintain this communication link, but it's fragile. The jamming system is actively trying to adapt to my countermeasures. I can probably keep the channel open for another 15 to 20 minutes before they figure out how to block it again. Rivera nodded and immediately began coordinating the extraction operation. Helicopter support, close air support, and ground reinforcements were all mobilized within minutes. The communication link that Morgan had established became the lifeline that allowed the entire rescue operation to proceed. But even as the rescue operation took shape, Rivera couldn't ignore the broader implications of what had just happened. Rachel Morgan, using methods that violated multiple regulations and accessing systems she wasn't authorized to use, had accomplished in 30 minutes what the entire communications staff had been unable to do with conventional approaches. Her success raised uncomfortable questions about military communication security, training procedures, and personnel management. If unauthorized techniques were more effective than authorized ones, what did that say about the effectiveness of standard protocols? If a disgraced operator could solve critical problems that trained specialists couldn't handle, what did that say about the military's approach to talent management? More immediately, Morgan's success presented a direct challenge to the punishment that had been imposed on her 18 months earlier. If her unauthorized access to communication systems could save lives in operational situations, how could the military justify excluding her from operational activities? Sir, Chun said quietly, the extraction helicopters are inbound, 12 minutes. Rivera nodded, but his attention remained focused on Morgan, who continued to monitor and adjust the communication link with intense concentration. Her fingers moved constantly across the control interfaces, making micro-adjustments to signal routing and encryption protocols to stay ahead of the adaptive jamming system. Bravo 6, Chapman Base, Morgan said into her microphone. Be advised, enemy jamming is intensifying. I'm going to switch you to secondary communication protocols to maintain contact. Roger, Chapman Base. We're taking sporadic small arms. Fire but holding position. Morgan's hands moved quickly across her equipment, implementing changes to communication protocols in real time. Rivera realized he was watching something extraordinary, not just technical expertise, but intuitive understanding of electronic warfare that bordered on artistry. Morgan wasn't just following procedures or implementing predetermined solutions. She was thinking faster than the enemy jamming system could adapt, creating new solutions moment by moment. Sir, Lieutenant Kim reported, helicopter extraction. Team is reporting they're having communication difficulties as they approach the target area. Morgan? Rivera asked. I can extend communication coverage to include the extraction helicopters, but it will require redirecting power from our primary communication array. We'll lose contact with higher headquarters for the duration of the extraction. Another unauthorized modification, another violation of protocol. But the choice was clear. Maintain communication with distant command structures or ensure that the extraction team could coordinate with the trapped SEALs. Do it, Rivera ordered. Morgan's modifications to the communication system became increasingly complex as she worked to maintain contact with multiple elements of the rescue operation. She was simultaneously routing communications between the trapped SEAL team, the incoming extraction helicopters, close air support aircraft, and the Tactical Operations Center. Each communication pathway required different technical approaches to bypass the enemy jamming, and Morgan was managing all of them in real time. Bravo 6, your extraction is inbound from the southeast. Helicopter call sign is Rescue 17. They'll be on station in 8 minutes. Chapman Base, Bravo 6. We can see enemy movement on 3 sides. They're definitely trying to pin us down before extraction arrives. Morgan looked at Rivera. Sir, I can establish communication with close air support, but the enemy jamming is getting stronger. They're learning how to counter my techniques. What do you need? I need to use experimental frequency bands that aren't authorized for operational use. And I need to push our transmission power beyond recommended safety limits. Each of Morgan's requests represented another step further from authorized procedures. Using experimental frequencies could interfere with friendly forces operating in the region. Exceeding power limitations could damage equipment or create electromagnetic interference with other systems. But conventional approaches weren't working, and the rescue operation was running out of time. Do whatever you need to do, Rivera said. Morgan nodded and began implementing changes that pushed the communication system far beyond its design parameters. The screens around her displayed warning messages about power levels, frequency allocation, and system stability, but she ignored them all. Her focus remained entirely on maintaining the communication links that were keeping the rescue operation coordinated. Close air support. This is Chapman Base, Morgan said into her microphone. I'm establishing direct communication with ground forces. Call sign Bravo 6 is in defensive position, transmitting location coordinates now. The complexity of what Morgan was managing was staggering. She was simultaneously maintaining secure communication with the trapped SEALs, coordinating with extraction helicopters approaching through hostile territory, directing close air support, aircraft to provide covering fire, and managing power allocation across multiple communication systems to prevent total failure. Any one of these tasks would have challenged a team of communication specialists working with full authorization and complete access to classified systems. Morgan was handling all of them simultaneously while using techniques that violated multiple regulations and accessing systems she wasn't authorized to touch. Rescue 17, Chapman Base, Morgan said. Bravo 6 is taking increasing enemy fire. They need covering fire from close air support before you begin extraction. Chapman Base, Rescue 17, we're 3 minutes out. Can you coordinate with air support? Already done, Morgan replied, her fingers flying across control interfaces. Strike aircraft are inbound on your position now. Rivera watched the coordinated rescue operation unfold and realized that Morgan had become the central nervous system of the entire mission. Every piece of the operation, ground forces, aircraft, extraction teams, and command elements was connected through communication links that she had created and was actively maintaining. Her fall from grace 18 months earlier seemed increasingly absurd in the context of her current performance. The woman who had been deemed too dangerous to trust with classified systems was now using those same systems to orchestrate a complex rescue operation that would save 11 lives. Sir, Chun reported, Rescue 17 is beginning extraction. Close air support is providing covering fire. Morgan continued to monitor multiple communication channels, making constant adjustments to maintain clear contact as the rescue operation reached its most critical phase. The enemy jamming system was working overtime to disrupt the extraction, but Morgan stayed ahead of it, implementing new countermeasures faster than the jamming could adapt. Bravo 6, Rescue 17. We're over your position now. Pop smoke to mark your location. Smoke is out. We're ready for extraction. Chapman Base, Rescue 17. We have visual on the ground team. Beginning extraction now. Morgan's voice remained calm and professional as she managed the communication traffic, but Rivera could see the strain in her posture. Maintaining this level of technical performance under pressure required intense concentration, and she had been working without break for over an hour. "All elements, this is Chapman Base," Morgan announced. "Extraction is in progress. Maintain communication discipline and report status changes immediately." The next few minutes were tense as the extraction helicopters worked to pull the SEAL team out of their defensive position while under enemy fire. Morgan maintained communication with all elements of the operation, coordinating between ground forces, aircraft, and the Tactical Operations Center to ensure that everyone had the information they needed. "Chapman Base, Rescue 17. We have all 11 personnel aboard. Departing the area now. Roger, Rescue 17. Safe flight home." As the extraction helicopters disappeared from radar contact, carrying the rescued SEAL team back to safety, a profound silence settled over the Tactical Operations Center. The crisis was over. 11 lives had been saved. The mission had been successful. But the success had come at a cost that was only beginning to be understood. Rachel Morgan, working with unauthorized techniques and accessing systems far beyond her security clearance, had accomplished something that conventional military communications had been unable to achieve. Her expertise had proven indispensable, her methods had proven effective, and her judgment had proven sound. Yet officially, none of this had happened. Morgan's involvement couldn't be acknowledged, her methods couldn't be endorsed, and her success couldn't be recognized without admitting that the military's approach to personnel management and communication security was fundamentally flawed. Morgan began shutting down the modified communication systems she had created, carefully returning equipment to its authorized configuration to avoid leaving evidence of her unauthorized activities. Her movements were methodical and professional, showing no sign of the intense pressure she had been under for the past hour. "Sergeant Morgan," Rivera said quietly. She looked up from her work. "Yes, sir?" "That was—" Rivera paused, searching for words that could acknowledge her contribution without creating an official record of activities that had violated multiple regulations. "That was exceptional work." Morgan nodded once, understanding the complexity of his position. "Thank you, sir. Will there be anything else?" The question hung in the air with unspoken implications. Would she be returning to her exile in the equipment maintenance bay? Would there be consequences for her unauthorized access to classified systems? Would anyone acknowledge that her actions had saved 11 lives? "No, Sergeant," Rivera said finally. "That will be all." Morgan gathered her equipment and walked toward the door of the Tactical Operations Center. Her expression was neutral, showing no indication of satisfaction, vindication, or expectation. She had done what was necessary to save lives, and now she was returning to her professional exile as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and everyone in the Tactical Operations Center understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A disgraced communications specialist, working with techniques that violated military protocol, had accomplished a rescue operation that conventional methods couldn't achieve. Her expertise had proven invaluable, her judgment had proven sound, and her commitment to saving lives had transcended personal considerations. As Morgan reached the door, she paused and looked back at Rivera. "Sir, if I may make a suggestion. For the official record, go ahead." The communication blackout was overcome through innovative frequency allocation and adaptive signal routing techniques implemented by the communications staff. The successful rescue operation demonstrates the effectiveness of creative problem-solving approaches when conventional methods prove insufficient. Rivera understood. Morgan was providing him with a way to explain the successful rescue without mentioning her unauthorized involvement or the violation of regulations that had made success possible. She was protecting both herself and the command structure from the complicated questions that her success would raise. "Thank you, Sergeant," Rivera said. Morgan nodded and left the Tactical Operations Center, returning to her assigned duties in the equipment maintenance bay as if she had never been involved in the most successful rescue operation the base had conducted in months. The silence that followed her departure was heavy with unspoken recognition. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that challenged fundamental assumptions about military hierarchy, protocol, and talent management. A disgraced specialist had proven more capable than authorized experts. Unauthorized methods had proven more effective than approved procedures. And someone who had been deemed untrustworthy had demonstrated complete dedication to saving lives. Rivera looked around the Tactical Operations Center at the faces of his staff. They had all seen what Morgan could accomplish when given the opportunity to use her skills. They had all witnessed the gap between her capabilities and the limitations placed on her by her past punishment. And they all understood that officially none of this had happened. The rescued SEAL team would return to base with stories of a successful extraction and effective communication support. The official record would show that the communication blackout had been overcome through innovative techniques implemented by the communications staff. Higher headquarters would receive reports of a successful rescue operation that demonstrated effective problem-solving under pressure. But the unofficial story, the story of Rachel Morgan's unauthorized brilliance and unacknowledged contribution, would spread through the base like wildfire. Personnel would whisper about the disgraced communications specialist who had saved 11 lives using techniques that officially didn't exist. Her legend would grow, even as her official status remained unchanged. The contradiction was painful, but inescapable. The military system that had punished Morgan for unauthorized activities had been saved by those same unauthorized activities. The expertise that had made her dangerous had also made her indispensable. And the person who had been deemed untrustworthy had demonstrated absolute trustworthiness when lives were at stake. Navy SEALs Lost Communication Story, Part 2. Debriefing room felt smaller than usual as the 11 members of SEAL Team Bravo filed in, their gear still dusty from the extraction zone. Their faces carried the distinctive expression of operators who had survived something they shouldn't have, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and confusion about how their desperate situation had suddenly transformed into a textbook rescue operation. Lieutenant Commander David Hayes, Bravo 6, set his helmet on the metal table with a sharp click that echoed in the sterile room. His dark eyes, still sharp from the adrenaline of combat, swept across the assembled command staff. Colonel Rivera sat at the head of the table, flanked by intelligence officers and communications personnel who had officially orchestrated the rescue. "Sir," Hayes began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to life or death situations, "I need to understand what happened out there. 1 minute we were completely isolated, no communication with anyone, surrounded by hostiles and looking at a potential catastrophic situation. The next minute, we had crystal clear communication, perfectly coordinated extraction and air support. That knew exactly where we were and what we needed." Rivera shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The official explanation he was prepared to give felt inadequate compared to the reality of what had transpired. "Your communication was restored through innovative signal routing techniques implemented by our communications team. They were able to bypass the enemy jamming using adaptive frequency management." Hayes leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Sir, with respect, I've been doing this for 12 years. I know the difference between standard communication protocols and something else entirely. What we experienced wasn't standard anything. Someone was actively managing our communication in real time, adapting to changes in our tactical situation, coordinating multiple elements simultaneously. That level of capability isn't in any manual I've ever seen." The other SEAL team members nodded in agreement. These were operators who understood military technology at an intimate level, who had worked with the best communication specialists in the military, and who could recognize expertise when they encountered it. What they had experienced during their extraction went far beyond conventional communication support. The voice on the radio, added Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, Bravo Team's senior enlisted operator. Whoever was managing our communication knew exactly what we needed before we asked for it. They anticipated our requirements, coordinated with air support before we requested it, and maintained clear contact even when enemy jamming was intensifying. That's not standard operating procedure. That's artistry. Rivera found himself in an impossible position. He couldn't acknowledge Rachel Morgan's involvement without admitting that the rescue had been accomplished through unauthorized methods by someone who wasn't supposed to have access to classified systems. But the SEAL team's questions deserved honest answers, and their tactical expertise made them impossible to deceive with vague explanations. Sir, Hayes continued, our communication was managed by someone who understood not just the technical aspects of signal transmission, but the tactical realities of our situation. They knew when to reroute communication to avoid interference, when to coordinate with air support, when to prioritize different communication channels. That level of integrated expertise suggests someone with extensive operational experience and advanced technical knowledge. The description was accurate, and Rivera knew it. Rachel Morgan's management of the communication during the rescue had demonstrated exactly the kind of integrated expertise that Hayes was describing. Her understanding of both technical communication systems and tactical operations had allowed her to provide support that went far beyond conventional communication assistance. But officially acknowledging her contribution would require explaining how someone without security clearance had accessed classified systems, how unauthorized techniques had proven more effective than approved methods, and how a disgraced specialist had accomplished what authorized personnel couldn't achieve. The important thing, Rivera said carefully, is that the mission was successful and everyone returned safely. Hayes studied Rivera's expression with the analytical skills that had kept him alive through countless dangerous operations. The colonel's response was evasive in a way that suggested there was more to the story than official channels could acknowledge. As a senior special operations officer, Hayes understood the complexities of military bureaucracy and the gap that sometimes existed between what happened and what could be officially recorded. Sir, Hayes said quietly, if someone went above and beyond to bring my team home, they deserve recognition for that contribution. The statement hung in the air, with unspoken implications. Hayes wasn't just asking for information. He was making it clear that the SEAL team understood they owed their lives to someone whose contribution wasn't being officially acknowledged. His words carried the weight of obligation, the recognition that extraordinary actions during desperate situations created debts that transcended military protocol. I understand your position, Lieutenant Commander, Rivera replied. But sometimes the best recognition for exceptional service is the knowledge that lives were saved and the mission was accomplished. Hayes nodded slowly, understanding the subtext. There had been unofficial involvement, unauthorized actions, and extraordinary expertise that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Someone had risked their career, their freedom, and their future to save 11 operators, and that person would receive no official credit for their actions. The revelation created a profound sense of obligation among the SEAL team members. They were alive because someone had been willing to sacrifice everything to help them, and that person would remain invisible in official records. Their rescue had been accomplished by someone whose contribution would be denied, whose expertise would be unacknowledged, and whose sacrifice would be unrecognized. Sir, Chief Thompson said, is there any way we can express our gratitude to the communication personnel who supported our extraction? Rivera considered the question carefully. The SEAL team's desire to acknowledge their rescuer was understandable and honorable, but any official recognition would create complications that could destroy Rachel Morgan's remaining military career. Her involvement had already violated multiple Regulations and drawing attention to her actions would invite investigation that could result in additional punishment. "Your gratitude is noted and appreciated," Rivera said finally. "I'm sure the communication staff understands that successful missions are their own reward." But even as Rivera provided the diplomatically correct response, he knew it was inadequate. Rachel Morgan's actions had gone far beyond professional duty. She had risked everything she had left to save people who didn't know she existed, people who couldn't acknowledge her contribution, people who would never know the name of the person who had brought them home alive. The SEAL team filed out of the debriefing room with the uncomfortable knowledge that their rescue had involved complexities they weren't authorized to understand. Their professional experience told them that someone extraordinary had been responsible for their survival, but military protocol prevented them from learning more about that person or expressing appropriate gratitude. Hayes lingered after the formal debriefing ended, his expression thoughtful. "Sir, off the record, if someone saved my team through unofficial channels, that person has my respect and my gratitude, regardless of what their official status might be." Rivera met his gaze and nodded slightly. "I'm sure that person would appreciate knowing their actions made a difference." Meanwhile, in Building C7, Rachel Morgan was back to her routine duties in the equipment maintenance bay, testing radio circuits and replacing damaged components as if the most significant communication achievement of her career had never happened. Her workspace was cluttered with basic radio equipment, spare parts, and maintenance manuals, a far cry from the sophisticated systems she had manipulated just hours earlier to save 11 lives. The contrast was jarring. Her fingers, which had moved with artistic precision across advanced communication control interfaces during the rescue operation, now performed mundane tasks like soldering broken connections and replacing worn components. Her mind, which had managed complex signal routing and real-time countermeasures against enemy jamming, was now focused on basic equipment maintenance. But Rachel showed no signs of frustration or resentment. She worked with the same quiet professionalism she had displayed during the rescue, completing each task thoroughly and efficiently. Her exile from operational activities had taught her to find satisfaction in smaller accomplishments, to take pride in work that others might consider beneath their capabilities. Technical Sergeant James Wong, her supervisor in the maintenance section, watched her work with growing curiosity. Rachel's technical skills were obviously far beyond what was required for basic equipment maintenance, but she never complained about the mundane nature of her assignments or requested more challenging work. "Morgan," Wong said, approaching her workstation, "there's something different about you today." Rachel looked up from the radio circuit she was testing. "Sir? You seem more focused, more intense, like you've got something on your mind." Rachel considered her response carefully. She couldn't discuss her involvement in the rescue operation, but Wong's observation was accurate. The experience of using her skills to save lives had reminded her of why she had joined the military in the first place, and it had also highlighted the gap between her capabilities and her current role. "Just trying to stay sharp, sir," she said finally. "Even basic maintenance requires attention to detail." Wong nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. Rachel's work had always been exemplary, but today there was something different in her approach, a kind of renewed purpose that went beyond routine equipment maintenance. What Wong didn't know was that Rachel had spent the 18 months since her punishment preparing for exactly the kind of situation that had occurred during the rescue. Her access to classified systems might have been revoked, but her access to technical manuals, training materials, and theoretical research hadn't been restricted. She had used her exile to study, to learn, and to develop new approaches to communication. Challenges. Her unauthorized access 18 months earlier hadn't been random curiosity or reckless hacking. She had discovered potential vulnerabilities in military communication systems, vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemy forces. to create exactly the kind of communication blackout that had threatened the SEAL team. Her attempts to demonstrate these vulnerabilities had been misunderstood as unauthorized intrusion rather than legitimate security research. The irony was profound. The vulnerability she had tried to expose 18 months ago had been exploited by enemy jamming equipment during the rescue operation. Her punishment for trying to prevent communication failures had removed her from the position where she could address communication failures when they actually occurred. But during the rescue, working with unauthorized techniques and accessing systems beyond her clearance, she had proven that her understanding of communication vulnerabilities could be used not just to exploit weaknesses, but to overcome them. Her knowledge of how systems could fail had given her the insight needed to make them work under impossible conditions. The rescue operation had vindicated her original research, validated her unauthorized methods, and demonstrated the practical value of her expertise. But this vindication would remain unofficial, unacknowledged, and unrecorded. Her success would be invisible, her contribution would be denied, and her expertise would continue to be wasted on routine maintenance tasks. As Rachel worked through the afternoon, word of the successful SEAL extraction began spreading through the base through unofficial channels. Personnel discussed the operation in mess halls, maintenance bays, and administrative offices, sharing details about the dramatic rescue and the sophisticated communication support that had made it possible. The stories grew in the telling, as military stories often do. The communication blackout became more complete, the enemy jamming more sophisticated, the tactical situation more desperate. The restoration of communication became more miraculous, the coordination more precise, the technical achievement more impressive. But in all these stories, no names were mentioned. The communication specialist who had orchestrated the rescue remained anonymous, their identity protected by the same military culture that had punished them 18 months earlier. Their expertise was celebrated in general terms while their specific contribution was carefully concealed. Rachel heard fragments of these conversations as she moved through the base during her daily routine. Personnel discussed the rescue operation with excitement and pride, praising the unknown communications specialist who had saved the SEAL team. Their admiration was genuine, their respect was sincere, and their gratitude was heartfelt. But none of them knew they were talking about the quiet woman in the equipment maintenance bay who had been professionally exiled for unauthorized activities. None of them connected the successful rescue with the disgraced specialist who had been deemed too dangerous to trust with operational responsibilities. The anonymity was both protective and painful. Rachel was safe from additional punishment because her involvement couldn't be officially acknowledged, but she was also isolated from the recognition and validation that her actions deserved. Her success existed in a strange liminal space where it was simultaneously celebrated and denied. The psychological impact was complex. On one hand, Rachel felt profound satisfaction from knowing that her skills had been used to save lives, that her expertise had proven valuable, and that her commitment to service had transcended personal considerations. The rescue operation had reminded her why she had chosen a military career and validated her belief that technical excellence could make a difference in life or death situations. But the lack of official recognition also highlighted the permanence of her professional exile. Her demonstration of extraordinary capability under pressure hadn't changed her status, hadn't restored her security clearance, and hadn't returned her to operational duties. If anything, her success made her exclusion from operational activities seem more arbitrary and wasteful. That evening, as Rachel completed her shift in the equipment maintenance bay, she noticed Colonel Rivera standing in the doorway. His presence was unusual. Senior officers rarely visited the maintenance section unless there were significant equipment problems or administrative issues that required command attention. "Sergeant Morgan," Rivera said, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Rachel set down her tools and followed Rivera to a quiet corner of the maintenance bay, where their conversation wouldn't be overheard by other personnel. His expression was serious but not hostile, suggesting that her unauthorized activities during the rescue hadn't resulted in additional punishment. "Sergeant," Rivera began, "I wanted to personally thank you for your contribution to today's successful operation." The acknowledgement was carefully phrased to avoid creating an official record of her involvement, but it represented the closest thing to recognition that her actions could receive. Rivera was speaking as one professional to another, acknowledging extraordinary service that couldn't be officially documented. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Rachel replied, maintaining the fiction that her involvement had been within authorized parameters. "We both know it was more than that," Rivera said quietly. "What you accomplished today went far beyond routine duty. You saved 11 lives using expertise and judgment that very few people possess." Rachel met his gaze directly. "Those operators deserve to come home, sir. Their lives were more important than any protocol or regulation." Rivera nodded, understanding the depth of commitment that her statement revealed. Rachel hadn't just provided technical support during the rescue. She had made a moral choice to prioritize lives over personal safety, mission success over career preservation, service over self-interest. "Sergeant," Rivera said, "I can't change your official status or restore your security clearance. The system doesn't allow for that kind of flexibility. But I want you to know that your actions today demonstrated everything that military service should represent." The recognition was meaningful but incomplete. Rivera could acknowledge Rachel's character and expertise in private conversation, but he couldn't address the systemic issues that had led to her punishment or the waste of talent that her exile represented. His appreciation was genuine, but it couldn't change the reality of her professional situation. "Sir," Rachel said, "if similar situations arise in the future, I hope Command will remember that unconventional problems sometimes require unconventional solutions." Rivera understood her meaning. Rachel wasn't asking for official reinstatement or formal recognition. She was simply making it clear that her expertise remained available if circumstances required it, regardless of official protocols or personal consequences. "I'll remember that, Sergeant," Rivera replied. As Rivera left the maintenance bay, Rachel returned to her work with a complex mixture of emotions. The rescue operation had proven that her skills remained sharp, that her judgment remained sound, and that her commitment to service remained absolute. But it had also highlighted the limitations of her current role and the challenges of working within a system that valued compliance over capability. The evening shift in the maintenance bay was quiet, giving Rachel time to think about the day's events and their implications. Her successful coordination of the rescue operation had been personally satisfying, but it had also raised difficult questions about her future in the military. Her expertise had proven invaluable during a crisis, but crisis situations were rare. Her willingness to work outside authorized parameters had saved lives, but it had also reinforced concerns about her reliability within established structures. Her commitment to mission success had been demonstrated beyond doubt, but it had come at the cost of further unofficial involvement in activities beyond her authority. The fundamental contradiction remained unresolved. The military needed her expertise, but couldn't trust her methods. Her capabilities were exceptional, but her authorization was limited. Her commitment was absolute, but her access was restricted. As Rachel worked through the evening, testing circuits and maintaining equipment that would support future communication needs, she found herself thinking about the SEAL team members who were now safely back at base because of her actions. Their lives had been preserved, their families would not receive tragic notifications, and their military careers would continue. That knowledge provided a sense of purpose that transcended official recognition or career advancement. The rescue operation had reminded Rachel that military service was ultimately about people, about bringing everyone home alive, about ensuring that no one was left behind, about using whatever skills and knowledge were available to protect those who put themselves in harm's way. Her 18 months of professional exile had been painful, but they had also prepared her for the rescue operation in ways that standard assignments might not have achieved. Her time away from operational activities had given her opportunities to study, to experiment with new approaches, and to develop techniques that weren't covered in conventional training. The punishment that had been intended to limit her capabilities had inadvertently enhanced them. Her forced isolation from classified systems had motivated her to understand those systems more deeply. Her exclusion from operational activities had given her time to develop innovative approaches that had proven crucial during the rescue. The irony was striking but not uncommon in military culture. Sometimes the most valuable contributions came from people working outside official structures, using unauthorized methods, taking personal risks that official protocols couldn't accommodate. As the night shift began and Rachel prepared to end her workday, she received an unexpected message through the base communication system. It was brief and unsigned, but its meaning was clear. 11 people went home tonight because someone cared enough to break the rules. That person will never be forgotten. The message had obviously come from one of the rescued SEAL team members, someone who understood that their survival had depended on unauthorized actions by an unknown person. Their gratitude couldn't be expressed officially, but it could be conveyed through informal channels that protected everyone involved. Rachel read the message several times before deleting it, understanding that its existence created risks for both sender and recipient. But the words provided validation that her actions had been understood and appreciated by the people who mattered most, the operators whose lives had been at stake. The knowledge that her contribution had been recognized, even unofficially, provided a sense of completion that official acknowledgement might not have achieved. The SEAL team members understood what had happened. They appreciated the risks that had been taken on their behalf, and they would remember the person who had brought them home, even if they never learned her name. That anonymous recognition, hidden from official records but preserved in the memories of people whose lives had been saved, represented the truest form of military honor. It was recognition based on results rather than regulations, on character rather than rank, on service rather than compliance. As Rachel gathered her tools and prepared to leave the maintenance bay, she felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with career advancement or official recognition. She had used her skills to save lives. She had demonstrated that expertise could overcome bureaucracy when necessary, and she had proven that commitment to service transcended personal consequences. The rescue operation would become part of base legend, told and retold in ways that celebrated extraordinary communication support while protecting the identity of the person who had provided it. Rachel's contribution would be remembered without being recorded, appreciated without being acknowledged, and honored without being official. Her professional exile would continue, her security clearance would remain revoked, and her access to operational activities would stay restricted. But her demonstration of capability under pressure had created a different kind of recognition, an understanding among those who mattered that some people possessed expertise that transcended official authorization. The contradiction between her punishment and her performance would remain unresolved, but it no longer seemed as important as it once had. Rachel had found a way to serve that didn't depend on official approval, to contribute that didn't require formal recognition, and to make a difference that transcended bureaucratic limitations. The rescue operation had changed nothing in terms of official policy or formal procedures, but it had changed everything in terms of understanding what was possible when expertise, commitment, and moral courage came together in defense of people whose lives depended on someone being willing to break the rules to keep them alive. 3 months after the rescue operation, Technical Sergeant Rachel Morgan, was still replacing damaged radio components in Building C7 when the alert came through the base-wide communication system. Another special operations team had encountered communication difficulties during a training exercise in the mountains, and standard protocols weren't resolving the problem. Rachel paused in her work, listening to the terse radio traffic that indicated a developing situation. The training exercise had become a real emergency when severe weather had moved into the operational area faster than predicted, creating communication dead zones that left a 12-man team isolated and unable to coordinate extraction. Within minutes, she could hear the familiar signs of escalating concern from the Tactical Operations Center. Multiple attempts to establish communication were failing, weather conditions were deteriorating, and the window for safe extraction was closing rapidly. The situation wasn't as immediately life-threatening as the SEAL rescue 3 months earlier, but it carried the same potential for tragedy if communication couldn't be restored. Rachel continued her maintenance work, but her attention remained focused on the emergency radio traffic. She recognized the voices of the communication specialists attempting to resolve the problem, and she could hear the growing frustration in their transmissions. Standard frequency management wasn't overcoming the communication blackout, and time was running short. "All stations, this is Chapman Base," came the voice of Staff Sergeant Chun over the emergency frequency. "We're implementing backup communication protocols. All available communication personnel report to the Tactical Operations Center immediately." Rachel set down her tools, understanding that the base was mobilizing every available resource to address the communication crisis. But she also understood that her official status meant she wouldn't be included in the emergency response, regardless of her demonstrated capabilities during the previous rescue operation. The irony was painful but familiar. 3 months earlier, her unauthorized intervention had saved 11 lives, but that success hadn't changed her official exclusion from operational activities. Her expertise remained available but inaccessible. Her capabilities proven but unused. Her willingness to help frustrated by regulations that prioritized compliance over results. 20 minutes later, Technical Sergeant Wong appeared in the maintenance bay, his expression urgent. "Morgan, I need you to come with me." "Sir?" Rachel asked, though she suspected what was happening. "Colonel Rivera wants to see you in his office, now." Rachel followed Wong through the base, passing groups of personnel who were obviously discussing the developing emergency. The training exercise that had gone wrong was becoming a significant operational concern, and the failure to establish communication was creating risks that extended beyond the immediate situation. Rivera's office was crowded with communication specialists, intelligence officers, and operations personnel, all focused on multiple screens displaying weather data, aircraft positions, and communication status reports. The atmosphere was tense, but not panicked, reflecting professional concern about a developing situation that remained manageable if the right solutions could be found quickly. "Sergeant Morgan," Rivera said as she entered, "we have a situation that requires your expertise." The acknowledgement was direct and public, representing a significant departure from the careful anonymity that had surrounded her involvement in the previous rescue. Rivera was openly requesting her assistance in front of multiple witnesses, accepting the official complications that her involvement would create. "Sir," Rachel replied, "what's the nature of the communication problem?" 12 special operations. Personnel are conducting a training exercise in mountainous terrain approximately 40 miles northeast of here. Severe weather moved into the area ahead of schedule, creating atmospheric conditions that are interfering with standard communication protocols. We've lost contact for the past 30 minutes, and extraction helicopters are reporting similar communication difficulties. Rachel absorbed the information quickly, her mind automatically analyzing the technical challenges presented by weather-related communication interference. Mountain terrain created natural obstacles to radio transmission. and severe weather could generate atmospheric disturbances that disrupted signal propagation across multiple frequency bands. "Sir, what communication assets are currently available?" she asked. "Full access to all communication systems, classified and unclassified," Rivera replied. "Complete authorization to use whatever techniques you deem necessary to establish contact and coordinate extraction." The grant of authority was unprecedented and significant. Rivera was giving Rachel official permission to access systems that had been forbidden to her for 18 months, to use techniques that had previously been considered unauthorized, and to work without the restrictions that had limited her involvement in operational activities. "Understood, sir," Rachel said, moving toward the primary communication console. "I'll need approximately 10 minutes to assess the situation and implement countermeasures." As Rachel began working with the communication equipment, the personnel in Rivera's office watched with professional interest. Her approach was immediately different from conventional troubleshooting methods. Instead of systematically testing individual communication channels, she began analyzing the overall electromagnetic environment to understand how weather conditions were affecting signal propagation. "She's mapping the interference patterns," observed Lieutenant Kim. "Instead of fighting against the atmospheric disturbance, she's looking for ways to work around it." Rachel's fingers moved quickly across multiple control interfaces as she implemented a communication strategy that took advantage of atmospheric conditions rather than competing against them. Weather-related interference affected different frequency bands in predictable ways, and understanding those patterns could reveal communication pathways that remained viable. "Chapman Base to Training Team 7, this is emergency communication." "Check, please respond," Rachel spoke into her microphone. Static filled the speakers for several seconds before a faint but clear voice responded. "Chapman Base, this is Training 7. We've been trying to reach you for over 30 minutes. Relief was visible throughout Rivera's office as communication was restored, but Rachel remained focused on strengthening and stabilizing the connection. The initial contact was fragile and could be lost if atmospheric conditions changed, or if her technical approach wasn't properly maintained. "Training 7, what's your current status?" Rachel asked. "We're in defensive positions due to severe weather conditions. Visibility is near zero, winds are gusting over 40 knots, and we're experiencing equipment malfunctions due to cold and moisture. We need immediate extraction coordinates and weather update." Rachel coordinated the information exchange between the training team and the tactical operations center while simultaneously managing the technical aspects of maintaining communication under difficult conditions. Her approach was methodical and efficient, demonstrating the same integrated expertise that had been crucial during the SEAL rescue operation. "Training 7, extraction helicopters are inbound to your position. Weather is expected to improve within the next hour, but current conditions require modified extraction procedures." The coordination of the training team extraction proceeded smoothly, with Rachel maintaining clear communication throughout the operation. But unlike the previous rescue, her involvement was official, authorized, and acknowledged by everyone present. The demonstration of her capabilities was public and recorded, creating a formal record of her expertise and judgment. When the training team was safely extracted and communication was restored to normal operations, Rivera addressed the assembled personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed represents the kind of innovative problem-solving that exemplifies military excellence. Sergeant Morgan's approach to this communication challenge demonstrates the value of technical expertise combined with operational understanding." The recognition was unprecedented in Rachel's experience. For 18 months, her capabilities had been acknowledged only in whispers and unofficial conversations. Now her expertise was being publicly praised by senior command in front of multiple witnesses who could attest to her professional competence. "Sergeant Morgan," Rivera continued, your communication support during this operation was exemplary. Your techniques were innovative, your execution was flawless, and your results speak for themselves." Rachel felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. The official recognition was validating, but it also raised questions about her future role and the consistency of military personnel policies. If her expertise was valuable enough to be publicly praised during emergencies, why was it considered too dangerous for routine operational activities? "Sir," Rachel said, "I was simply applying technical knowledge to solve a practical problem. The same principles could be implemented by any communication specialist with appropriate training and authorization." Rivera studied her response, understanding that Rachel was deflecting personal credit while highlighting systemic issues about training and authorization. Her comment suggested that the communication challenges they had experienced weren't isolated incidents, but symptoms of broader gaps in military communication capabilities. "Sergeant, your point about training and authorization is well taken," Rivera replied. "Perhaps it's time to reevaluate how we develop and utilize communication expertise within our operational framework." The suggestion was diplomatically phrased, but its implications were significant. Rivera was acknowledging that Rachel's punishment 18 months earlier might have been counterproductive, that her exclusion from operational activities represented a waste of valuable expertise, and that current personnel policies might not effectively balance security concerns with operational requirements. Over the following weeks, Rachel noticed subtle changes in her treatment by base personnel. The successful resolution of the training team communication crisis had created official documentation of her capabilities and word of her technical expertise spread through formal channels rather than unofficial gossip. Communication specialists sought her advice on complex technical problems. Operations officers consulted her about communication planning for upcoming missions and training. Personnel requested her input on curriculum development for advanced communication courses. Her expertise was increasingly recognized and utilized, even though her official status remained unchanged. The shift was gradual but significant. Rachel found herself involved in activities that went beyond basic equipment maintenance, contributing to projects that required advanced technical knowledge and participating in planning sessions that shaped communication strategies for future operations. But the most important change was psychological. For 18 months, Rachel had felt isolated from the meaningful work that had originally motivated her military career. Her skills had been wasted, her knowledge had been ignored, and her commitment to service had been constrained by regulations that seemed more focused on punishment than problem solving. The official recognition of her communication expertise during the training team crisis had restored her sense of professional purpose. She was once again contributing to military effectiveness in ways that utilized her capabilities, validated her expertise, and demonstrated the value of innovative approaches to technical challenges. 6 months after the training team incident, Colonel Rivera called Rachel to his office for a private conversation. His expression was serious but not hostile, suggesting that the meeting involved significant developments rather than additional problems. "Sergeant Morgan," Rivera began, "I want to discuss your future with the military and the best way to utilize your expertise within our operational framework." Rachel listened carefully, understanding that Rivera was addressing the fundamental contradictions that had shaped her career for the past 2 years. Her demonstrated capabilities couldn't be ignored, but her previous punishment couldn't be simply erased without addressing the systemic issues that had created her situation. "Sir, I appreciate your consideration of my professional development," Rachel replied. "My primary concern is contributing to military effectiveness in whatever capacity my skills can be most useful." Rivera nodded, recognizing that Rachel was prioritizing mission success over personal advancement. Her willingness to focus on contribution rather than recognition demonstrated the kind of character that military leadership valued, but it also highlighted the waste of talent that her exile had represented. Sergeant, I've been reviewing your personnel file and the circumstances that led to your current assignment. The more I examine the situation, the more I believe that your punishment was based on incomplete understanding of your motivations and objectives. The statement was carefully worded, but its meaning was clear. Rivera was suggesting that Rachel's original punishment had been unjust, that her unauthorized activities had been misunderstood, and that her exclusion from operational duties represented a mistake rather than appropriate discipline. "Sir," Rachel said, "I understand that my actions 18 months ago violated established protocols. My methods may have been unauthorized, but my intentions were focused on improving military communication. Security." Rivera considered her response, understanding that Rachel was acknowledging the technical violation of regulations while defending the underlying purpose of her actions. Her position was that unauthorized methods had been justified by legitimate security concerns, even though those concerns hadn't been properly understood at the time. "Sergeant, based on your demonstrated expertise during recent operations, I'm recommending that your security clearance be restored and that you be assigned to duties that fully utilize your technical capabilities." The announcement was stunning. In its implications, restoration of security clearance would return Rachel to the operational activities that had been forbidden to her for 2 years. Assignment to duties that utilized her technical capabilities would end her exile in basic equipment maintenance and restore her access to the challenging work that had originally attracted her to military communication specialties. "Sir, I'm honored by your recommendation," Rachel replied. "But I want to ensure that my restoration to operational duties doesn't create precedents that undermine military discipline or security protocols." Rivera appreciated her concern about broader implications. Rachel wasn't just thinking about her personal situation, but about the effects that her reinstatement might have on military personnel policies and disciplinary procedures. Her willingness to consider systemic impacts demonstrated the kind of institutional loyalty that transcended personal interests. "Sergeant, your concern is noted and appropriate, but your recent performance has demonstrated that technical expertise combined with sound judgment and commitment to mission success represents exactly the kind of capability that military operations require." The reinstatement process required several months of administrative review, security investigations, and policy discussions at levels far above base command. Rachel's case had become a symbol of broader questions about military personnel management, the balance between security and capability, and the treatment of personnel whose expertise exceeded conventional boundaries. During this period, Rachel continued her equipment maintenance duties, while occasionally providing unofficial consultation on complex communication challenges. Her expertise was increasingly recognized and utilized, but always within the careful boundaries that protected both her and the command structure from complications related to her unofficial status. The informal recognition of her capabilities created an unusual situation where Rachel was simultaneously excluded from official operational activities and essential to solving technical problems that affected operational success. Personnel understood that she possessed expertise that could be crucial during emergencies, but they also understood that her involvement had to remain unofficial to avoid regulatory complications. 9 months after the training team rescue, Rachel received official notification that her security clearance had been restored and that she was being reassigned to the base communication center as a senior technical specialist. The assignment represented complete restoration to operational duties and formal recognition of her expertise. But the notification came with an unusual addition, a personal letter from the base commander acknowledging her professional competence, her commitment to service, and her contribution to successful operations, despite the challenges she had faced during her temporary assignment to equipment maintenance. The letter was significant because it created an official record of her capabilities and character that transcended the disciplinary actions that had defined her recent career. It represented formal acknowledgement that her punishment had been completed, that her expertise was valued, and that her future contributions would be welcomed and supported. Rachel's return to operational duties was marked by quiet professionalism rather than celebration. She resumed her responsibilities as if the 18 months of exile had been a brief interruption rather than a career-threatening punishment. Her technical expertise was immediately utilized for complex communication challenges, and her innovative approaches were officially encouraged rather than privately tolerated. The transformation was complete, but understated. Rachel had evolved from a disgraced specialist working in exile to a recognized expert whose capabilities were officially valued and systematically utilized. Her journey from punishment to restoration had taken 2 years, but it had also created a deeper understanding of both her own capabilities and the institutional challenges that shaped military careers. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural rather than individual. Rachel's story had spread throughout the military communication community, creating a narrative about the value of expertise, the importance of innovation, and the occasional necessity of working outside established boundaries to achieve mission success. Young communication specialists learned about the specialist who had been punished for unauthorized activities but who had used those same activities to save lives during emergencies. Her story became a case study in the balance between compliance and capability, between following orders and achieving results, between personal safety and professional courage. The lesson wasn't that regulations should be ignored or that unauthorized activities were acceptable. Instead, the lesson was that expertise combined with sound judgment and commitment to mission success could transcend bureaucratic limitations when circumstances required extraordinary measures. Rachel's legacy was measured not in official commendations or career advancement, but in the understanding that military service sometimes required people to risk everything they had to ensure that others could return home safely. Her willingness to sacrifice her career to save lives had created a standard of professional commitment that inspired others to prioritize mission success over personal considerations. 2 years after the SEAL rescue that had changed everything, Rachel sat in the base communications center during a quiet evening shift, monitoring routine traffic and maintaining the systems that connected military personnel around the world. Her official status had been restored, her expertise was officially recognized, and her contributions were formally valued. But she still remembered the 18 months when her skills had been considered too dangerous to use, when her expertise had been systematically wasted, and when her commitment to service had been constrained by regulations designed to prevent exactly the kind of innovation that had proven crucial during emergencies. The memory served as a reminder that military effectiveness depended not just on following procedures, but on the willingness of individual personnel to take risks, to think creatively, and to prioritize mission success over personal safety when circumstances demanded extraordinary measures. Rachel's story had become part of the base culture, told and retold as an example of what military service could represent at its best. Personnel understood that someone among them had been willing to sacrifice everything to bring others home alive, and that knowledge created a standard of commitment that influenced how they approached their own responsibilities. The communication center that night was quiet, with routine traffic connecting personnel around the world and standard procedures managing the flow of information that kept military operations coordinated and effective. But Rachel knew that behind the routine efficiency lay the potential for crisis, for situations where standard procedures wouldn't be sufficient, where extraordinary measures might be required. Her experience had taught her that military service was ultimately about people, about ensuring that everyone who deployed in defense of their country had the support they needed to complete their mission and return home safely. Sometimes that support required following established procedures, But sometimes it required the courage to work outside those procedures when lives were at stake. The balance between compliance and capability, between following orders and achieving results, between personal safety and professional commitment, remained delicate and context-dependent. But Rachel's story had demonstrated that when the balance had to be struck, the side of saving lives was the right choice, regardless of personal consequences. As her shift ended and she prepared to turn over communication responsibilities to the next watch, Rachel felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with official recognition or career advancement. She had found a way to serve that honored both the system she was part of and the people whose lives depended on that system functioning effectively. Her expertise was now officially recognized and systematically utilized, but more importantly, she had proven that individual commitment could transcend institutional limitations when circumstances required extraordinary measures. The lesson had been costly in terms of personal sacrifice, but it had created understanding that extended far beyond her individual situation. Military communication would never be the same after Rachel Morgan's demonstration that expertise, innovation, and moral courage could overcome any technical challenge when the alternative was leaving people behind. Her legacy lived not in official records, but in the knowledge that someone had been willing to risk everything to ensure that everyone else could come home alive. The greatest honor was not the restoration of her clearance or the recognition of her expertise, but the simple knowledge that when lives had been at stake, she had possessed the skills to save them and the courage to use those skills regardless of personal consequences. That knowledge was more valuable than any official commendation, more meaningful than any career advancement, and more lasting than any bureaucratic recognition. In the end, military service was about people taking care of people, about ensuring that those who served in defense of others received the support they needed to complete their mission and return home safely. Rachel had learned that sometimes the most important service happened when nobody was watching, when official approval wasn't available, and when the only reward was the knowledge that everyone made it home alive. That lesson had cost her nearly 2 years of professional exile, but it had also taught her something invaluable about the true meaning of military service and the responsibility that came with possessing expertise that could save lives. She had paid the price for unauthorized innovation, but she had also proven that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to keep the promise that no one would be left behind. 5 years had passed since that night when Technical Sergeant Rachel Morgan first broke protocol to save 11 lives. The Military Communications Center at Chapman Base hummed with activity as a new generation of specialists worked alongside seasoned veterans, their screens glowing with data streams from operations across 3 continents. Master Sergeant Morgan now supervised the Advanced Communication Division, her workstation positioned where she could oversee both routine operations and emergency responses. The silver stripes on her uniform reflected not just rank progression, but recognition of expertise that had fundamentally changed how the military approached complex communication challenges. On this particular evening, as storm systems moved across the Pacific and satellite coverage flickered intermittently, Rachel received a priority transmission that made her pause. A reconnaissance team operating in disputed waters had encountered sophisticated jamming that was unlike anything in current threat assessments. Standard countermeasures were proving ineffective, and the team was requesting immediate technical consultation. Master Sergeant, called Staff Sergeant Lisa Chun, one of the new specialists trained in Rachel's innovative methods, the jamming signature is completely novel. It's adapting faster than our standard protocols can compensate. Rachel moved to Chun's workstation, studying the signal analysis data with practiced eyes. The jamming pattern was indeed sophisticated, showing characteristics that suggested foreign military technology had evolved beyond current intelligence estimates. But more concerning was the adaptive nature of the interference, which seemed to learn from each countermeasure attempt. It's not just blocking our communications, Rachel observed. It's studying our responses and adjusting its approach in real time. This represents a significant advancement in electronic warfare capabilities. The situation developing on the VE screens reminded Rachel of that first crisis years earlier, when standard approaches had proven inadequate and lives had hung in the balance. But this time, her expertise was officially recognized, her methods were formally authorized, and her team was trained to think beyond conventional limitations. "Chun, initiate Protocol 7, Rachel instructed, referring to the advanced communication procedures that had grown from her original unauthorized techniques. "We'll need to implement adaptive countermeasures that can evolve faster than their jamming system." Protocol 7 had become the military's standard response to sophisticated electronic warfare threats, incorporating the innovative approaches that Rachel had pioneered during her years of exile and proven during subsequent emergencies. What had once been unauthorized innovation was now official doctrine, taught to communication specialists throughout the military. As her team implemented the advanced protocols, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The punishment that had nearly ended her career had ultimately led to breakthroughs that strengthened military communication capabilities worldwide. Her willingness to work outside established boundaries had created new boundaries that better served operational needs. "Master Sergeant," Chen reported, "we're establishing contact. The reconnaissance team is responding." The familiar satisfaction of successful communication under impossible conditions never diminished, but now it came with the knowledge that her methods were helping train others who would face similar challenges. Every technique she had developed, every innovation she had pioneered, every lesson she had learned was being passed to the next generation of communication specialists. "Reconnaissance Alpha, this is Chapman Base," Rachel spoke into her microphone. "We have you loud and clear. Report your status." "Chapman Base Alpha Team, we've been isolated for 3 hours. That jamming was like nothing we've encountered before. How did you break through?" Rachel smiled, remembering her own confusion. Years earlier when faced with communication challenges that exceeded conventional training. "Alpha Team, we've learned a few new tricks since the old days. Stand by for extraction coordination." The rescue operation proceeded smoothly, with Rachel's team maintaining clear communication throughout the process. But beyond the immediate success, the incident provided valuable intelligence about advancing enemy electronic warfare capabilities and confirmed the ongoing importance of innovative approaches to communication challenges. Later that evening, as the communication center settled into routine overnight operations, Rachel found herself in the base memorial garden, where a simple granite monument honored military personnel who had made extraordinary sacrifices in service of others. Among the names carved into the stone were those of operators who had died when communication failures prevented timely support or coordination. The memorial served as a reminder of why Rachel's work mattered, why innovation was essential, and why the willingness to work outside established boundaries could mean the difference between life and death for people serving in dangerous places around the world. "Master Sergeant?" Rachel turned to see Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the SEAL officer whose team she had helped rescue 5 years earlier. He was now stationed at Chapman Base as a liaison between special operations and communication support, his presence ensuring that the lessons learned from that first crisis continued to influence operational planning. "Commander Hayes," Rachel replied. "Working late tonight?" "Couldn't sleep," Hayes said, joining her beside the memorial. "Been thinking about how much has changed since that night, when someone I didn't know saved my team's lives." The acknowledgement was still meaningful, even after years of official recognition and career advancement. Hayes represented the human cost of communication failures and the human benefit of communication excellence. His presence at the base served as a constant reminder that technical expertise existed to serve people, not abstract military objectives. That night changed everything for a lot of people, Rachel said. Your team's survival justified risks that seemed impossible at the time. Hayes nodded, studying the names on the memorial. You know what I think about sometimes? How many people throughout military history had the skills to save lives but never got the chance to use them because the system was too rigid to recognize what they could offer. The observation touched on something Rachel had considered often during her years of professional growth. Her story was unusual not because of her technical expertise, but because circumstances had forced recognition of that expertise despite institutional resistance. How many other talented personnel had been marginalized by systems that prioritized compliance over capability? The military is getting better at recognizing and utilizing diverse forms of expertise, Rachel replied. Your experience helped create understanding that innovation and reliability aren't mutually exclusive. Their conversation was interrupted by Rachel's communication device, which indicated an urgent message from the communication center. Advanced threat analysis had identified similarities between the evening's jamming incident and signals intelligence. That suggested broader electronic warfare developments requiring immediate attention. Duty calls, Rachel said, but Hayes walked with her back toward the communication center. Master Sergeant, Hayes said as they approached the building, I want you to know that your influence extends far beyond communication technology. You've changed how special operations teams think about risk, innovation, and the importance of having people in support roles who are willing to push boundaries when lives are at stake. The recognition was gratifying, but Rachel understood that her individual story was less important than the cultural changes it had helped create. Military organizations were beginning to value innovation alongside compliance, to recognize that exceptional expertise sometimes required exceptional methods, and to understand that rigid adherence to procedures could sometimes prevent the very outcomes those procedures were designed to achieve. Inside the communication center, Rachel's team was analyzing intelligence reports that painted a concerning picture of advancing enemy electronic warfare capabilities. The jamming incident earlier that evening appeared to be part of a broader pattern of technological development that could threaten military communication systems worldwide. Master Sergeant, reported Sergeant Martinez, Rachel's deputy, intelligence indicates that tonight's jamming technology represents a significant advancement over previously known capabilities. We may need to develop entirely new countermeasure approaches. The challenge was familiar but evolved. Just as Rachel had once faced communication problems that exceeded existing solutions, her team was now confronting threats that pushed beyond current defensive capabilities. The difference was that innovative responses were now expected, supported, and systematically developed rather than hidden and punished. Martinez, initiate Project Resonance, Rachel instructed, referring to the advanced research program that developed next-generation communication technologies. We'll need to accelerate development of adaptive countermeasures that can respond to evolving electronic warfare threats. Project Resonance represented the institutionalization of the innovative thinking that Rachel had pioneered during her years of exile. Instead of waiting for crises to force recognition of new approaches, the military was now proactively developing communication capabilities that anticipated future challenges and incorporated lessons learned from past emergencies. As her team began implementing advanced research protocols, Rachel felt the familiar satisfaction of matching human capability against technical challenges that threatened military effectiveness. But now that satisfaction came with official support, adequate resources, and the knowledge that successful innovations would be shared throughout the military rather than hidden from official recognition. The work continued through the night, with Rachel's team developing and testing new approaches to electronic warfare that built upon years of accumulated expertise and innovation. By dawn, they had created preliminary countermeasures that showed promise for defeating the advanced jamming technology that had threatened the reconnaissance team. The technical achievement was significant, But more important was the demonstration that military organizations could evolve, could learn from past mistakes, and could create systems that valued innovation alongside tradition. Rachel's journey, from punishment to recognition, had become part of a broader transformation in how military institutions approached expertise, risk, and the balance between compliance and capability. As the morning shift arrived and Rachel prepared to end her watch, she received a message that brought her story full circle. The reconnaissance team that had been threatened by advanced jamming the previous evening had completed their mission successfully and was requesting permission to personally thank the communication specialists who had enabled their safe return. The request represented something that would have been impossible during Rachel's early years, when communication support was invisible and unacknowledged. Military culture had evolved to recognize that operational success depended on technical excellence, that support personnel played crucial roles in mission accomplishment, and that expertise deserved recognition regardless of traditional military hierarchies. But perhaps most importantly, the request demonstrated that the lessons Rachel had learned about service, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for others had become part of military culture more broadly. Personnel understood that their survival might depend on someone being willing to work outside established boundaries, and they valued that willingness accordingly. Rachel's response to the reconnaissance team was simple and direct. "Your safe return is the only recognition we need. But you're welcome to visit the communication center anytime to see how we keep everyone connected." The invitation reflected her understanding that military service was ultimately about people taking care of people, about ensuring that those who deployed in dangerous situations had the support they needed to complete their missions and return home safely. Technical expertise existed to serve that fundamental purpose, and all recognition should flow from mission success rather than personal advancement. Years later, when new communication specialists asked about the origins of the innovative techniques they were learning, instructors would tell them about the sergeant who had risked everything to save lives, who had been punished for unauthorized activities that later became standard procedures, and who had proven that sometimes the most important service required breaking rules to keep promises. But they would also emphasize that Rachel Morgan's story was not about the wisdom of ignoring regulations or the virtue of unauthorized activities. Instead, it was about the importance of understanding why regulations existed, recognizing when circumstances required extraordinary measures, and accepting personal responsibility for the consequences of choosing mission success over personal safety. The legacy was not rebellion against authority, but commitment to the deeper purposes that authority was meant to serve. It was not disregard for procedures, but understanding of the principles that procedures were designed to protect. It was not individual heroism, but recognition that military effectiveness required people who were willing to sacrifice personal interests for collective success. Rachel's transformation from disgraced specialist to recognized expert had taken years, but the broader transformation in military culture that her story represented was ongoing. Each new generation of personnel learned about the balance between compliance and innovation, between following orders and achieving results, between personal safety and professional courage. The story continued with every communication link that enabled successful operations, every innovative solution that overcame technical challenges, and every person who chose service over self-interest when lives hung in the balance. Rachel Morgan had become part of military history not because of individual achievement, but because her experience had helped create understanding that made everyone more effective. In the end, the greatest honor was not the recognition of expertise or the advancement of career, but the knowledge that lessons learned through personal sacrifice had made it less likely that others would face similar choices between compliance and conscience. Military service was about ensuring that each generation served more effectively than the last, and Rachel's contribution to that ongoing mission was her true legacy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.